Welcome everyone to Over It. I'm your host, Donna Gilman, and today I have the delightful Lisa Middens with me. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Donna.
Welcome to Over It.
Thank you.
So
Glad to be here.
I want to give you a chance just to introduce yourself to our listeners, and we can also talk a little bit about how we know each other and sort of, our big picture idea about this episode. So maybe you could just start us off by talking a little bit about you and what you're up to these days.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm, first I'll just tell you I'm 61. I just turned 61.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I'm the Assistant Director of Annual Giving at the Greenfield Community College Foundation. I've been in that position for a little over 4 years. It's my third career. And I'm a proud mother of a 19-year-old and a 24-year-old. And my hobbies are writing memoir and singing and playing bells in church and reading. I'm in a book club and just keeping up with my friends and my family members.
And you're a big community advocate, and I think a big asset to any community that you live and work in. And I am super curious about this being your third career. I didn't quite know that. So I think I'm going to want to hear a little bit more about that as well. And we know each other because we used to be neighbors. And your son must have been, how old is he now? He's 19, right? So he must have been, Avi was 5 when we moved into that house, and he's 14 now. So they have been friends for 11 years, despite their age difference, which is remarkable. And your son, Leo, was my mother's helper, really, when my son was little. And they have formed an incredible bond that has lasted to this day. I mean, your son is amazing. And he told me recently that he considers my son his little brother, which was so sweet. But that's how I really got to know your family. And your daughter was our sitter, even before your son started hanging out with my son. So, we go way back. And today we were going to talk in part about how you identify as neurodivergent and what that means to you and how you came to that understanding of yourself. And I think that I would imagine there's going to be a lot of people listening that will be able to relate to aspects of your journey. Do you want to start there? Just talk a little bit about how you identify and how you came to that understanding of yourself and how that's informed your identity?
Sure. Yes. Well, all of us who grew up in the 70s started hearing about hyperactivity and that kind of thing. And so it just seemed like it was usually just people that were extreme, people that had extreme behaviors and didn't apply to most people. And so the first time I was really confronted with it as, something that was in my family, my daughter started at Northfield Mount Hermon that's a private school, a private boarding school. She was a day student. And so her academic workload went tripled or quadrupled from public school to private school in 9th grade. And so she came home one day and said to me, Mom, there's another girl who said that she takes ADHD medicine to help her focus on her studies. And I just did the usual thing that most parents that I know do. And like, oh, yes, right. Yeah, I know what that's about. No, we're not going to go there. But I did the responsible thing and told her physician that's what she asked me. And the doctor said, well, let's just see, it's a huge shock to go from public school to private school. Let's just see how she does. And she continued, she made good grades. It was just really hard and it was stressful for her. And she continued to ask me. And I said, finally, I wanted her to go consult the people at her school, but she was shy about that. And it's very hard to get a neuropsych evaluation out in Western Mass.
Right.
You have to really get on a waiting list.
Yes.
It takes a long time. And so finally, in time for her senior year, she did finally break down and go to the psychiatrist at her school, and she got diagnosed as having ADHD. So I did a lot of reading about it. And I think this is a story common to many women, especially moms whose kids get diagnosed with it. They read to support their kids and then they see themselves.
Right.
So I was like, wow. Because they describe girls are often misdiagnosed
That's
because
right.
they don't really have the hyperactivity part. They're just a little bit dreamier and they daydream more and other kinds of things that aren't usually flagged. And I always was a very good student in school, so I wouldn't have been noticed by the teachers. And it was the same for my daughter. She always did really well in school. And so it's really started to just slowly learn more. And it was like a key in a lock that just solved a lot of mysteries I've always had about myself and my family of origin, the behavior of my parents, because I think they haven't been diagnosed, but I think they're definitely neurodiverse too, which is a term I'm very happy to have discovered at Greenfield Community College because it's a much nicer term because it can be stigmatizing using that acronym and that diagnosis because people.
Right. And now the term neurodivergent also allows us access, I think, to a fuller spectrum of understandings of all of the different ways that someone's brain may be functioning and also all of the gifted ways that someone's brain may be functioning. I'm wondering for you, as you think about the unlocking of that mystery for yourself and like pieces starting to fall into place as you thought about your own experience, what were the pieces that resonated for you, like those ahas when you looked back over your life that helped you to see this neurodivergence or this sort of more attention deficit profile for yourself?
Well, the biggest thing and why I was so drawn to your podcast and just the title of your podcast over it is, I did really well in school. I managed fine. It was hard. I had some, issues with self-esteem and things, but a lot of women did that were my age. And it wasn't until I had children and was trying to manage, a household with children and that I just was very overwhelmed. And I remember asking a friend of mine, because I think she also is neurodiverse. I think in retrospect, she wasn't diagnosed either, but why does it seem so much harder for us than other women? Like they don't have cleaner houses than we have. They don't necessarily have better behaved children than we have, but they're not as upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're more able to oh yes, it's just my mess. And oh yes, but for me, it was really stressful that I just felt like I was always just barely managing to kind of hold it all together.
Yeah. Yep.
And
was there an aspect of self-judgment or shame about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's also classic with people that are neurodiverse, undiagnosed, unmanaged. They're just always feel shame because my understanding, and you know more about it, is just that you're aware of so many things all at once.
Right.
That you don't filter as much. So you walk into your kitchen and it's not like you can calmly go and just make dinner and do step 1, 2, 3. It's you walk into your kitchen and you think, oh, I have to do this, get the kids ready for this open house. And then there's the piano lessons. And then there's the floor is really dirty. And then, I haven't called my mother in so long. Or then, my friend's sick and I need to call her. And I need to coordinate this family holiday, like all of it all at once, like do.
There's no way to filter
brain.
Any of it.
Yeah.
Or necessarily maybe in those moments prioritize, what task and did you find yourself having trouble starting tasks or finishing tasks or getting paralyzed?
Yes, all those to some degree. So I think one thing that a lot of people that have ADHD struggle with is this procrastination, because you need a certain level of dopamine to feel alert. And so things that kind of aren't that fun to do, you could just feel your brain sort of the dopamine slipping away down your shoes.
Yeah.
And so you kind of put that off until you're so stressed that you might not get it done, that you get the adrenaline rush to your brain so you can focus and get the task done.
Yes.
So now that I know that's a pattern, I don't have to just be a slave to it. But before I knew that I had ADHD, I just felt so bad about myself for that. Like, oh, you're just not disciplined enough.
Yes, that's right. I'm not good at time management.
Childish.
Oh, you're childish. You're immature.
Right.
Yes. Right.
Yep.
I think that this is something that, isn't talked openly about a lot, but I certainly hear from clients and friends who identify as neurodiverse, and particularly the ADD or ADHD piece, is just the immense amount of both shame and anxiety that can coexist with this, particularly prior to being diagnosed. You talked about now you don't have to be a slave to it, with the understanding that this is part of you. What kind of mechanisms or adaptations or tools, are there things that you've used that have helped you to sort of have less overwhelm? Or is it just that in the face of the overwhelm, you don't internalize it in the same way?
Yes. And also I have a lot more compassion for myself.
Yeah.
I think because it just magnifies the overwhelmed feeling when you don't really know why you're feeling overwhelmed. You also add in then judgment of yourself, and then you get kind of filled with despair. So I don't have to have that whole process anymore.
Yes.
Because I'm just like, oh, this is just how your brain works.
Mm-hmm.
This is also why you can be really creative, and why you can think of things that other people don't think of, and why you're willing to persist. That's the other thing. Like 80 people that are neurodiverse often can hyperfocus, so they can really persist through something that other people would throw away with fatigue. But no, we're really like, if we're interested in something and we believe in something, like we have way more follow through than neurotypical people often do with things. So I now am much more forgiving of myself, and I have systems in place. So I did talk therapy for 4 years with a wonderful therapist. And so she helped me do this from 2018 till I graduated myself after 4 years.
Okay.
Now I go back for tune-ups every 6 months or so, but she helped me just have more positive self-talk about things. Like, okay, so I'm just going to look at that part of that counter, and that's really clean, and that's so great.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's like radical gratitude,
Yeah.
Like, oh, look at that, Lisa, you did all the dishes. I used to be so depressed by dishes. After I had kids, it's like, all I do is dishes.
Yeah.
And so then I just flipped in my mind, like, oh, actually, I could think of this as kind of a fun, enjoyable, meditative, soothing thing to do, and also give myself a lot of, credit for cleaning something.
Absolutely.
Fixing something.
And having the gratification of doing it and maybe finishing it.
Over It is proudly sponsored by the Couples Center of the Pioneer Valley, offering specialized services to couples and individuals with relationship issues and concerns. Check them out on the web at pioneervalleycouplestherapy.com or call them at 413-570-0067.
Right. So we're talking about looking at our brains from a more strength-based perspective and understanding that there are so many strengths that come with a brain that may have also some struggles in other areas. And I think one of the things that can often obscure a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD is this whole focus issue, is that people will feel confused by the fact that they can actually super focus on one thing and not focus at all in other areas of their lives. And many times people don't get a diagnosis until adulthood, particularly women. And we know that brains run in families. And you were talking about your family of origin story and looking back now and thinking about, I bet my parents had some neurodiversity. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Or
yeah, that was just such a gift to finally figure that out, because I was so puzzled by certain things about my parents. They were very loving people. They really gave me a great childhood. but they were also really hard to deal with frequently. And I could never understand how my father was such a loving person, but he would just snap and get really angry.
Yes.
Very, very short fuse.
Yes.
And he could get into these like black moods where everything was negative, and he needed a lot of stimulation. Like he had to drink like fancy beer, you know. He didn't get drunk, so it was never like his alcohol was not a problem for me. I was always like, thank goodness there's beer.
Oh,
Because
okay.
it would really level his mood. So I think he was self-medicating with beer.
Yes.
Growing up, he smoked like 2 packs of cigarettes a day and drank tons of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So it's self-medicating that way. And he's a connoisseur, and he has like really passionate interests in things like history of science, and loves to learn all there is to learn about stuff. So he had a very hungry brain. So that all made sense.
Right.
From the looking at him as a neurodiverse person. And my mom, similarly, I was always like, my mom is really smart, but why does she have this persona of being so ditzy? Like that was how she got through life.
Yep.
Like she's very smart, and she reads all these complicated books and is very interested and can discuss what they're about. But then she has this very childlike kind of persona, and her handwriting looks very childlike, but she isn't childlike. She's a mature woman. So she just had odd traits that didn't really fit together until I saw her as a neurodiverse person.
Interesting.
Yep.
In terms of how your daughter has integrated this, I mean, I guess that's her story to tell, but because she was able to get herself diagnosed, she was still in college when that happened, right? Or she was actually in high school.
Right. She was a senior.
I'm just thinking about what a benefit to be assessed early in life or earlier in life, and hopefully be able to integrate that. And has that, do you think, ultimately been beneficial for her to have that earlier diagnosis?
Yeah, I think definitely it was. She does a lot of exercise. She lives in a place that's very beautiful, that always makes her feel really good. When she moved to Southern California, I completely supported her going to college in Southern California, because I felt like now that's the time. If you can if you can do it, that's the time to do it. So she goes surfing a lot and hikes a lot, and needs that sunlight and that positive environment.
Yes.
The social environment for young people is really great for her. I mean, people are so friendly.
Yeah.
And open to new ideas and new things. She's a yoga teacher. So she has a full-time job in a nonprofit. Plus she teaches 2 yoga classes. Plus she goes surfing before work.
Oh my gosh.
So she's I think she does all those things, and that keeps her brain half fed.
Yes.
And she does a lot of wellness things. She eats, she's a vegan, so she eats a really great diet. She loves to cook, and she has a great relationship. So she has carefully kind of put together this life. She's been fortunate also. I mean, some people aren't as fortunate. You don't always have complete control over your circumstances.
That's true.
She's definitely done as much as she can to create a life that keeps her feeling good.
Before we came on air, you were sharing a little bit about going to visit one of your nephews, I believe at his school, and just noticing your godson, and so he goes to a school for neurodivergent kids. And you were saying you just noticed this wonderful community of kids, and thinking about, wow, this is amazing, right? To be with people that, he may be able to identify with. When you think about your own sort of school experience and social experiences, looking back, do you feel that the ADD or the neurodivergence played a role in your social experience as you were growing up?
Absolutely. And my childhood best friend was also diagnosed as an adult. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about that. And I think neurodiverse people do have a way of being drawn to each other, because we do see the world similarly. And she's a very kind person and has a big heart. And that's another I mean, people that are neurotypical could be kind and have big hearts, but there's something that happens in social situations when you are neurotypical, and if you happen to be maybe like to have power, and it's very empowering to be neurotypical in some ways, because you can sort of control the situation and you know what's what, and you don't feel overwhelmed. And people that are neurodiverse, either with ADHD or autism, are often don't feel in control of situations because they're overwhelmed by their sensory
experience
overload and everything. And so what can happen in high school, but certainly happened in my high school, I fortunately was not picked on that much. I was usually like defending people that were picked on, but it's frightening to see that that there's this kind of shrewd, calculating aspect that can happen with someone that's neurotypical, because they can sort of see vulnerability in people that are neurodiverse. So my godson has autism and goes to a school with other students with autism, and he's 16. And so I went to his Halloween party, and we were all just, looking at these beautiful like bats flying in the sky, and they knew so much about those bats.
Yeah.
And they were saying the absolutely fascinating, creative, interesting things. And then we were sitting around the fire, and this incredible conversation started about like music and the difference between classical music and rock music. And it was, wow, where were these kids when I was in high school?
Right.
And my best friend, Rhonda, was like that a little bit, but there wasn't any of the sort of very, for me, difficult, traumatic kind of aspects of high school gatherings that I remember, where the people were all kind of really super self-conscious and trying to impress each other. And sometimes there was some cruelty there, and people were teasing each other. So they're not completely immune to it. I mean, my godson has been upset by certain behaviors in his school. So I'm not trying to just
paint a perfect world.
Yeah, it's not a perfect world, but there is some community that can happen with neurodiverse people, which is why GCC has a neurodiversity club, which I think is great.
Oh, that's great.
And my son's group of friends, pretty much all of them are neurodiverse and have diagnoses and have accommodations, and they really enjoy each other a lot.
Yeah. I mean, this is the big difference for kids coming up now is, there is the opportunity to be diagnosed or to have a deeper understanding. And hopefully through that, an opportunity to connect with others. And, in my opinion, neurodiverse folks are the most quirky, creative, insightful human beings. And I wonder too, in terms of your experience, you talked about this being your third career, what it's been like for you as you've moved through these careers, your experience of being neurodiverse in the workplace, and also how that sort of shaped the ways you've gravitated to what you've gravitated towards, and like what these other careers have been comprised of.
Yes. I've definitely thought a lot about my whole career path. Now I'm over it. I feel good about it.
Oh, that's good. So you mean you're over the self-judgment about maybe the different twists and turns that the path has taken?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Because I was very good in school, and in senior year in high school, I took honors classes, and everybody else there was headed off to like the most competitive school they could go to. Mm-hmm. But I was very turned off. And now I think maybe just insecure about this whole like being judged your worth as a person by what school you got into. Because back in 1980, it wasn't so much, it wasn't as expensive as it is now.
Yeah.
And so my mom came home one day and said to me like, oh, I just got my teeth cleaned and our hygienist is buying her own house. Why don't you do dental hygiene? And I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I thought, well, maybe I always thought, well, I'll just have a trade so I can just study whatever I want to study. Because I really wanted to study. I was a complete art history nerd from age 12 to 25. So I was like, ooh, I'll be able to always pay the bills and just study whatever impractical things that I want to study. And I always thought of it would be in service to something after that.
Yes.
Like it was a trade just to fall back on so I could, go to the city and pay my rent and kind of explore who I was.
Yeah.
So I did do dental hygiene school right after high school. And I think I am a healer to some extent. So it really resonated with me in that way. I loved doing dental hygiene. I really did. Although the status part was hard in Boston. You're like, especially in the early 80s, you were just like the girl in the office.
Right, right.
And my first dentist boss was amazing. It was the best dentist boss I ever had. All the other ones were, perfectly good people, most of them, but they just want you just to be filling this little tiny niche and just clean someone's teeth and then get them out of the office. They don't want you to really do anything more. My first dentist boss was incredibly creative person. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he was really, really interesting, and was trying to do holistic dentistry, and wanted his hygienist to spend half the time assisting and half the time doing hygiene. And he was trying all these cool things on people. So that was a great job for me. Yeah.
What drew you away from that work into something else?
Well, I always intended to continue my education. So I worked my way through my bachelor's degree in history at UMass Boston, and I supported myself as working as a part-time hygienist. I never had to work full-time as a hygienist because I made enough money per hour to work part-time. So it was always, the plan was always to sort of evolve out of it. Although I'd kept my license for 30 years.
Wow.
And then I went I got my degree in history and got a job at the Kennedy Library in the archives, and worked as eventually the associate curator of the Ernest Hemingway manuscript collection.
So cool.
Because they happened to have Ernest Hemingway's papers there. And that was a really fun job. But I was 30 years old, and I really wanted to live in Europe, and I thought I better do it now before it's too late, before I have a family. Because I always wanted children since I was probably 2.
Wow.
Or 3. Yeah. I was really wanted children. So a way to work in Europe was to work as a dental hygienist, and I had kept my license through volunteering. So I used to volunteer as a hygienist for Bridge Over Troubled Waters Dental Clinic for teenagers who had left their homes and were living, in shelters around the streets.
Wow.
So I would go like once a month and do hygiene. So I kept up my skills, and sometimes worked on Saturdays. And so I worked in Switzerland as a hygienist for a year, and then came back to the States and did career exploration, and realizing like archives was really not going to work for me as a long-term career, because it was the Hemingway part was really exciting and interesting, and had public programs and exhibits, but I gave that job away to explore what being a real archivist was like. And I spent like a whole year in the basement, empty boxes of somebody that was like this peripheral person to the Kennedy administration, and just wasn't enough stimulation for me.
Yep.
So I worked as a hygienist and did an internship at Facing History and Ourselves, which is it's a Holocaust or racism education nonprofit that talks about racism for 8th grade students through the lens of the Holocaust, because it's so well documented.
Yes.
But they basically they feel that developmentally 8th graders should be learning about that. So I did an internship there and got really excited about doing history curriculum. And so I eventually came out here to do a master's in public history and the history of race in the 20th century. Because my plan was I really wanted a family with children, but if I wasn't going to meet anyone who that would work for, I wanted to do a couple years as a classroom teacher in middle school, social studies, history, and then write curriculum after that, because at Facing History, you had to serve your time in the classroom. But then after 6 months here, I met Greg, my husband now, and it was the first time I ever met anyone that it would really work with. I mean, he could love me and I could love him, and he was willing to, consider having a family. And so I finished my history master's, but went back into hygiene then, because I always had my license. I kept it current. because as a new mom, I really knew that I couldn't handle like starting a whole career plus dealing with a newborn.
Right.
And I could work part-time. And
right.
so Greg worked part-time and I worked part-time. And so I did that for 11 years until Leo, my second, who's Avi's honorary big brother.
Yes.
So until 2011, when the dental hygiene field really changed a lot since I started, and it just wasn't a good fit for me anymore. And I really wanted to challenge myself more. And I thought, well, what's my other marketable skill? And in graduate school at UMass, I wrote grants and I was the coordinator of the History Institute. And so I thought, oh, grant writing, because I wrote a grant for a Teachers Institute at the Porter Phelps Huntington Museum. It's funny how one woman that encourages you, like, it stays with you for life. Like,
yes,
encouraging people is great. So there was a woman who's still there, Susan, and I can't remember her last name, told me, she's like, that's the best grant I've ever seen.
Oh, wow.
And it just like stayed with me. It was such a beautiful thing that she said that. And she praised me. And so I thought, oh, that could be my marketable skill because I do like to write.
Yes.
And so then I ended up breaking my ankle one summer, and a good friend of mine was the Meals on Wheels walkathon coordinator. And she said, why don't you come volunteer for me? And since I had a broken ankle, I really couldn't go volunteer anywhere. I had to do it with someone I knew. And I did a whole series of informational interviews and found out there's this whole field called development or fundraising that includes grant writing and fundraising for a cause. And I had taken care of my father-in-law and really feel a huge compassion for elderly people. And so raising money for Meals on Wheels really spoke to me. I was like, I just can't work in history anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it just, when I was young, it was felt relevant, but as I grew older, I really wanted to do something immediately impactful for someone's life. So I ended up getting a job as development manager at LifePath. It was called Franklin County Home Care. That's an area agency on aging, and worked for them for almost 6 years as a development manager. So wrote grants, did this Meals on Wheels walkathon fundraising event. And I was just amazed at how fun that was. I thought, oh, I wish I had discovered fundraising and development when I was younger, because it's unbelievably rewarding.
Yes.
There's many neurodiverse people in that field.
Really?
Many of them are undiagnosed. I secretly theorize, just because there's so much variety to it. You can do a lot of different things. Like, I do a lot of design work, writing, interpersonal, talking to people, and just being part of a mission. I work now for Greenfield Community College Foundation, and that's incredibly good for me because there's so much going on there all the time.
Yes, a vibrant community college.
I'm one of those people who could have been a student forever.
Yes.
And so I love raising money for it because I believe in the cause so much. Like, you can't enjoy this field unless you feel a passion for the mission.
Right.
Work.
I'm blown away by your career path and all of these interesting twists and turns. And I mean, that's just an incredible journey that you've been on, and you're happy and you're thriving in your work and you're making a difference. So that's pretty incredible.
Thank you. It took me a while to get there. I spent so much time feeling bad about my career.
Isn't that so interesting?
I feel I'm over it.
You are over it. I just think that is so the case, right? I mean, I guess that's part of getting older and having some self-compassion grow. Yeah. You look back over your experiences and you're like, well, I guess it's all okay because, like, here I am, right? I'm still here, and I'm hopefully doing something that is meaningful for me, and that my path was perfectly fine. But right, all those years of sort of agonizing and feeling less than, and comparing yourself to others who maybe, from your perception, had a more straightforward course. It's like all of that wasted energy and like self-condemnation for nothing, right? So I'm glad you're over it. I'm glad you're over that part of it for sure.
If you're enjoying Over It, make sure you follow us on Spotify, Amazon Music, or Apple Music.
I mean, when you think about this concept of being over it, are there other manifestations, other aspects that you just feel over, things that just don't hold you in the way that they used to?
Well, there's one that I'm looking forward to being over it. I'm still kind of struggling with. I also do a lot of writing. I'm in a writing group and have written really since I was a child, but I have not had the confidence. I have to really follow through and finish a longer project.
Yes.
So I spent time writing poetry and did like open mic spoken word events years ago. So I finished those, but I didn't publish them. And I have a friend who does a wellness blog, and so she asked me to submit blog entries. So I, finished those, but I'm working on a longer memoir right now, and so it's definitely been challenging just to be okay with how my authentic voice really is, and not compare myself to other people,
right?
And give myself permission. This is a story only I can tell. That's why I'm doing the trouble of writing this. It's like about a specific period of my life and kind of a struggle and something I learned that I want to share with other parents. And so I'm still kind of in the struggle of like how to find time to really give that the attention it needs. Because I tend to kind of be really motivated by helping people and being of service. And so I kind of overpromise.
Yes. Overcommit yourself.
Overcommit myself. And try to take care of everyone and everything and not like spend time just writing and working.
This is relatable, right? And it's also, I would say for myself, also the relatable piece about continuing to have faith in your own voice and to kind of come back to that place where you say, this is worth writing. It is worth continuing. And I do want to prioritize this, right? And just continuing to practice that sort of belief in self, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So, I'm going to be self-publishing it, and I have support around structuring it. And now you really don't need an agent and go through a publisher because you can have print on demand.
Yes. Yeah.
So I know how I'm going to get it out in the world. It's just really like protecting that time.
Yes, that's right. And what else do I want to ask you? I'm curious for you. I mean, you always knew you wanted to be a mother. And I'm not just saying this, like your kids are amazing. And I've known your kids for a long time, but also you are really great about posting old videos on Facebook. And so I also get to see these little glimpses into them when they were even younger than I ever knew them. And I'm just wondering, like, how did you bring so much joy? To me, it seemed like you brought so much joy to your parenting. And was that passed down or modeled for you from your parents? Or like, how did you bring yourself into such a space of joy?
Oh, well, thank you, Donna. That's really sweet. Yeah, I've struggled a lot too. That was mothering was definitely, I joke to people now. I say, if you ever want to continue to think you're really a great person, don't ever have kids.
Yeah, something to that, right?
Because it's nothing will ever challenge you as much as and nothing will ever make you feel as inadequate to the task.
It's so true.
Yeah. So if you really, but my mom is a very playful person.
Mm-hmm.
She was a elementary education teacher, elementary school teacher. She's just so fun and laughs so easily.
Yeah.
And gave me, a great childhood. I had a lot of, struggled with her and issues with her and thought she was like my biggest problem for a while, but I don't anymore.
Right.
Now that I'm a mother, I'm like, wow, she did a really good job.
Yep.
So that helps. And my husband, I married someone who is very fun also, and very neurodiverse, but he's an artist and he really is playful and loves children.
Yeah.
I mean, my father really loved children also. Like my father he was a military officer, so he had a big, huge, heavy duty career. But, he just didn't spend a ton of time like actually parenting us, but he was just delighted by our presence.
Oh.
And other people's kids too, not just his own kids.
Yeah.
And my mom also was just really played with us. And, we had a lot of independence. I mean, back then parents didn't spend as much time fussing over their kids as we do now. But,
Yes.
so that's the model that I had as for parenting.
My dad was also an elementary school teacher. He was a 6th grade English and history teacher. And my father would really fit the definition of, we don't use this term anymore, but Asperger's,
Oh,
yeah, very. And, I look back now and I recognize that I got my playful, creative spirit from my father. But growing up with someone who was so strange and so eccentric and so embarrassing, I was so embarrassed by him. I mean, and he was embarrassing. I mean, he would be out, mowing the lawn in the heat of the summer with, of course, no shirt and his Bermuda shorts, and then his black knee socks pulled up all the way to his knees, and his transistor radio, and waving to all my friends. And it was just, I was horrified, but he was the one who would get down on the floor and play with us when we were little, right? And write stories with us. And he would do just about anything. He loved playing. And so it's interesting looking back now. And I mean, of course, he was never diagnosed, but I can see so clearly, that he was on the spectrum. And I can see so clearly now the marital issues that my parents had, because in part, there was no understanding of this. Mm-hmm. And my mom just did not know how to handle my father, didn't know how to work with somebody who was as fanciful and eccentric as he was, and how that, it really created so much discord in their marriage. And so, and I never thought of myself as someone who was neurodiverse. In fact, if you'd asked me, I would have said, whoa, somehow that escaped in my genetics. And, I've always been, I was a straight A student, and I was always really on top of things. But I understand now, when I'm in the world and, my partner will say to me, you are just about one of the smartest people I've ever met. But it's really astounding to me that, we can be out somewhere and you will not remember, how to get from one part of the mall to the other. He's like, and, where you parked the car, or, we can walk the same route again and again in a new city. And it's like, I have no idea how to get back to the hotel. And I've come to realize that's where my attention stuff is, and if I'm on my own somewhere new, I have to force myself literally to look at landmarks and think about okay, I'm taking a left and there's a tree, then I'm taking a right, and it takes everything I have. But that's where it is for me. And, and then there's also aspects of, overwhelm that I didn't really understand, and I'm a psychologist, by the way. I didn't see it in myself until the last couple of years, where I was like, oh, this is my version of that. When I have days where for some reason I'm completely paralyzed, and I just never even thought about myself in these ways until quite recently. And then, of course, it was so easy for me to identify it in my child and to walk him through assessment and all of that. Never, ever thought about it for myself until recently. So it is very interesting now to look back and see the ways that this has been a part of me all along, and part of my family history.
Over It is proudly sponsored by the Couples Center of the Pioneer Valley, offering specialized services to couples and individuals with relationship issues and concerns. Check them out on the web at pioneervalleycouplestherapy.com or call them at 413-570-0067.
Actually, now that you're talking about this, I'm remembering that I actually, the reason I really diagnosed myself was because I was reading this book because of my husband.
Yes.
I forgot who the authors are, but it's like ADHD and marriage, mm-hmm. or how how does ADHD affect relationships?
Yes. And we can include some resources at the end of the podcast.
And so they have a whole description of a couple where one person has ADHD and the other person doesn't, and why it can be so confusing
and confounding, right? Yeah.
Doesn't, because they don't understand why the person who has it, has such trouble with certain things, and they think they're just irresponsible, or they're just, I think my husband, he has not been diagnosed, but I think his form of neurodiversity is different than mine. And so I'm much more the one that has to keep everything all together, keep us all organized. But then as I was reading, I was like, wait, no, I've got this too.
Mm-hmm. It just manifests differently. Oh, a relief.
It was a relief to know that that's why that certain things were a struggle.
Yeah.
And I think it really helped me have a lot more compassion on my husband, a ton more. It really helped my marriage a lot.
It's so interesting. We see so many couples come through for treatment where either there is an understanding that one partner is neurodiverse and it's just been extremely difficult to navigate as a couple, or they'll come in and it's really clear to the clinician that one of the partners is neurodiverse and doesn't realize it. And, that's a really sensitive thing to even bring up as an idea, right? You certainly don't want to armchair diagnose people. But, again, it is important to be talking about the relational issues that can ensue, because it's really easy to take it personally when you think your partner they just don't care, or they're immature, or they're just disorganized, or they just don't follow through on their commitments and they're always letting you down. If there's any question, yes, we're talking about it can be difficult in our area to get a full assessment, but, if there is a way to seek assessment, to meet with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, it can really be an empowering and transformative experience to become educated about neurodivergence and the ways that may be playing out for you or a loved one. So I will include some resources along with the podcast. For you, you're somebody who is really outspoken about this issue. And I think that really allows other people to not feel so ashamed. I'm sure there are people who will be listening today thinking, wow, I never put the pieces together for myself. So I just want to say thank you for being out there with this and, taking, I think, a really empowered stance on it.
Well, thank you. I hope people feel empowered, because one of the things that I found empowering was I went to a career counselor while I was developing this third career, and she was saying, we really need a new acronym. ADHD sounds so pejorative. How about creative attention perspective?
Oh, I love that.
And I was like, that's right.
Creative attention perspective.
Right. I have other friends that have it too. And we really are very valued employees. There's a stigma attached to it. You don't want to admit you have it because you're worried that your boss will then think you're not adequate.
Right.
But we're very valued employees because we do maybe take it a little bit longer, but we're much more determined to push through and reach, improve things and go to better, make things better.
Yeah, look outside, be able to see outside the box.
Not as complacent and just happy with the status quo. We don't want anything rattled. We want to do a good job. We want to do it well. We want to do it in a creative way. So that's not really ideal for all bosses. Some people I found, some dentists especially, want very boring hygienists who just want to just clean teeth and get people out the door,
Yes.
So
when I hope over time society is shifting to be more honoring of neurodivergent people, because I think the perspective of looking at the world and being able to see things that sometimes neurotypical people don't see or don't see in the same way is such a beautiful perspective, right? I remember my son being really little and looking into a fire and looking into the flame and saying, Mom, there's a whole world in there. And he was maybe 3 or 4. And I was just so profoundly touched by that. So I think that, loving our neurodivergent selves and loving others with neurodivergence in our lives and getting a deeper understanding of the gifts that brings is really important.
Yeah. And I value neurotypical people too, because it's like we need all kinds in the world.
We need
right?
all kinds in the world.
I love people that can just calmly, organize everything and not get stressed at events.
Yes.
Like I have a colleague like that. Like she never gets stressed at events. Like, what are you so worrying about, Lisa?
Yeah.
I'll be like, oh my God, we have to wipe all the tables off and all the crumbs have to be gone.
Yes.
She's like, it's fine.
Yeah. And it's so important, again, coming back to the partnership thing. If you're in a partnership where one of you is neurotypical and one is neurodivergent, it can feel for the neurotypical partner sometimes like a great burden. I've often heard people say, gosh, I have to be the executive functioning for everyone around here. And there may be some truth to that in some ways, but then also looking at the strengths, the joy, the playfulness, the creativity, the perseverance that somebody with neurodivergence brings to the table and actually valuing that. And again, finding a way to make those strengths work in the relationship as well, which is the work of the couples therapist. But yeah.
And you need ethics too. I mean, the neurodiverse person has to, I think a strong, moral compass and not making other people suffer for your challenges with organization is important.
To take ownership, right? I like the ethics of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, right. So if I wanted to be really self-indulgent, I would be, for instance, to be like, oh, I'm neurodiverse and I shouldn't have to show up to work and do this and get this done on time. Or, so my boss does give me some leeway. Like sometimes it takes longer, but I try to get things done when I say I'm going to get them done, because it's very tempting not to. And it's not that socially constructive always to take so long doing everything,
Yes.
If you can help.
Right. I have a client who used to refer to herself and her ADD as always doing damage. And so I really, love to uphold this CAP creative attention perspective.
Because it does feel like a cap.
Yeah.
I have other friends who I've also coached to maybe consider if she has it, and she's now completely convinced that she does. It does feel like something, your brain definitely feels different. Sometimes it does feel like a little bit of a cap.
Sometimes for me, it feels like a fog, but also, the fog that kind of descends. And I think for me, sometimes now being able to be much more self-compassionate when the fog is there, and sometimes being able to say, this may be a day for whatever reason, or a half a day, or whatever it is, that I'm just not that productive. There's a way in which, again, you can't, drop out of life, but that you can sometimes just acknowledge, what, maybe today's just one of those days I'm not going to be super on point. And that's what it is.
Yeah. And you need it. I mean, I think everyone needs it, but you need the times just to creatively feed yourself and look out the window for a while.
Right.
And admire the squirrels and
there is so much power in daydreaming and being imaginative, right?
Right.
So much. And I think obviously that's a whole nother topic, but something that, this generation of kids is probably really sadly lacking because of screen usage. Is just the ability, right? To just daydream.
I was glad to have read something about current neuropsych research.
Yes.
The brain actually can't get stimulated all the time. That's one of the reasons some people may be getting so depressed, is they are never bored.
Yes.
So I tried to okay, I'm in a line. I'm just going to do what I used to do in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
Yeah, which is nothing.
Space out.
Yeah, space out. Right.
Instead of always check your email. Check this, check that.
Yes. The brain does not always need to be solving problems. The brain actually needs just to float and rest.
Yeah.
And imagine, right? So I just want to say, I'm really grateful to have just had this time together, just to get to know you better. And also just to be able to talk about something that's real and so many people can relate to, and talk about it without shame and self-judgment. So I just want to say a big thank you for being part of Over It today. And, thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Donna. You're a very skilled interviewer.
Oh, geez, thanks.
I want you to have your own radio show, TV show.
Oh,
paper column.
Oh, thank you. Well, just don't follow me around the mall, because I will definitely get us lost. I often have to now take a picture of where I parked the car, particularly like in a parking garage.
Yeah.
I have to take a picture of where it is because it just won't encode in my brain. But anyways, for all of our neurotypical and neuroatypical listeners out there, I just want to say thank you for being part of Over It. And if you're enjoying the podcast, remember to like, follow, and share. And we'll see you next time on Over It. Take care.
Control yourself. Don't drink too much. Don't talk too much. Don't look that way. Don't stare at that boy. Don't giggle. Don't wiggle. That's too short. Shackle me.